Hello, welcome here today to another Kerfuffle showcase, and I am delighted to have with me Russell Quirk from Proper PR. How are you, sir?
I'm well, mate. How are you?
I like the fat look of this. We've even matched up on the outfits. Mine in a slightly larger size, I would guess. But
well, I dressed down particularly because I knew it was you. So normally, obviously, I'd be dressing up if it was anybody else, but that's why I'm in my pajama top.
Lovely. And we won't talk about the bottoms. That's far too.
What bottoms? What bottoms?
Right, Russell. We're going to be talking today about your new business, and in terms of talking about, you know, the whole PR side of things and what you can do for people, for businesses. So that clearly it's an area, you know, you nail this from both sides. I think it's fair to say, as you always talk about, you may not agree with some of the articles you put out there in a personal capacity on things like Property Industry Eye, but without a shadow of a doubt, they are the most engaged ones out there, aren't they, in terms of there? So can I kick off just first of all with the point about, you know, is there such a bad thing? You know, the famous phrase is there's no such thing as bad publicity. What's your view on that? And is it possible to go, you know, too far? And if so, where's the limit on it?
Yes, I think it's probably 99% true. I think there's a lot of stuff that happens where people can actually overreact to the effect of getting publicity for something that maybe that's not quite so positive. But I think we all lead busy lives. We have loads of messages thrown at us as kind of consumers. And so I think, you know, weeks and months down the line, I think people probably remember more the person or the brand rather than the story. There are exceptions, of course. The Gerald Ratner exception is probably the biggest one, isn't it? But even he's done okay now, you know, and he's
bounced back completely, hasn't he? And
he's done an Alan Partridge, exactly. But he's now famous for that faux pas, which has made him famous, which I think he's benefited from. So, you know, it crashed and burned his jewelry business, and he was a bit stupid slagging off his own product, wasn't he? But actually, at the end of it, it's kind of come good. I think, you know, I think there's lots of misconceptions about PR, Simon, lots and lots of misconceptions. Some people think that PR is just for celebrities and big businesses. Actually, I would argue that the polar opposite is true, because in order to become that celebrity, even if it's becoming a celebrity in your industry or that big brand, you have to do something in the way of PR in the first place. And that's not just posting stuff on Facebook and LinkedIn like you and I do relentlessly. It needs to be more strategic than that. And above all, the thread running through all this is that, you know, what PR does for businesses big and small is not only to get them out there in terms of brand awareness, which obviously is the point, but the very fact that third parties are then talking about you as an individual or your brand. So whether it's Property Industry Eye, Estate Agent Today, you know, or where we get particularly excited is where we land coverage in, let's say, the Telegraph, the Times, the FT, the Mail, the Express, etc. It's the trust and the credibility that comes with that. And whether you're a B2B business or a B2C business, you know, so whichever side of the fence you're on, you know, publicity and validation, I suppose, is what it is obviously never going to be a bad thing. But that said, I also wouldn't say that anybody should just do PR. And you might want to talk about this in a bit more detail. The marketing mix that PR is part of is also very, very important.
But it's ultimately it's the golden egg, isn't it? If you get a PR piece published there, that independent validation, as you said, great. You know, whether it's trade press or whether it's obviously up into the nationals or whatever else there. The effect of that. We were talking off screen actually. It's award time at the moment, and there's lots of agents obviously talking about having one plaudits for that side of things. But this carries just so much more weight than that, doesn't it? Because it's always about that independent validation.
Yeah, and PR can be quite clever. You know, there's a lot of PR and PR agencies that think that PR is about getting the occasional, what we call puff piece in a trade publication or in a national newspaper. You know, so Kerfuffle are brilliant, which obviously they are, but, you know, Kerfuffle have seen massive growth, you know, Simon Whale, this and the other. But there's only so many times that Graham Norwood at Estate Agent Today or Mark De Silva at Property Industry Eye, or indeed Hugh Graham at the Times or George Hammond at the FT are going to write that piece. You know, once George Hammond has done a wonderful puff piece on Kerfuffle, well, he's not going to do one next week or even next month or maybe even next year. So we as the agency then start getting, I think, even though I say so myself, quite clever when it comes to this weekly, relentless, consistent output, which then paints the client as an expert, as a thought leader. So, whether you're selling to the public or whether you're selling to business, your audience then are looking, thinking that these guys are not only in the press all the time, but they really, really know what they're talking about. So it's, it can be quite nuanced, quite subtle. But I guess, look, my point is, it's kind of, it's for everybody. And I know we're going to come on to this, but assuming you can afford it.
Yeah. But just like advertising, these companies that make big mistakes by doing a massive splash just as a one-off, but don't keep that consistency up, or indeed actually going back to awards. The thing that I always noticed was that it wasn't so much per se. Yes, you could, of course, paid attention to the people winning the big gongs, but it was the ones. They could disappear, fly by night, couldn't they? But the ones that won year on year on year, that consistency, you knew that was a brand that needed to be taken seriously.
Yeah, and that's the art. Is, look, we all know who the biggest agents are. We can all argue, I suppose, who the best agents are. The same as we know who the biggest car brands are, or the biggest, inverted commas, in any sector. The real trick is to make yourself as a brand appear to be bigger and more important than you really are. And there's probably, there's probably no better example than eMove. Now, although eMove, crashed and burned, it failed 3 years ago. When I started that business, it was all based on social media and PR. Yeah. And PR was almost, I think it probably was pretty much the first pound I spent was on a PR agency right back in 2009, 2010. And although we spent loads of money on TV in the end and Google AdWords, the example, I guess, that we're talking about here is that for many, many years, kind of particularly in the early days of eMove, when we were listing maybe, 30 properties a week, 100 properties a month eventually, or whatever it might have been, we gave the perception, without fibbing, without being deceptive, that we appeared to be much, much bigger than we really were. And then, of course, once you get to that stage where journalists perceive that you're even bigger than you are, then you get journalists coming to you, either directly or through your agency. And then you do get, Anna White and Deirdre Hitwell and Ruth Blomfield emailing and ringing you saying, can I have a comment on the latest house price index from Rightmove, please? Or can you tell us what you think about Michael Gove being the latest Secretary of State for Communities Local Government? That starts coming to you, so it becomes self-perpetuating. But it's
a virtuous cycle of publicity, isn't it?
It's almost, I shouldn't use the phrase really. I don't want to do a Ratner, but it's kind of fake it till you make it almost. It really is, So yeah, and look, did eMove do that? Yes, I think you have done a brilliant job, by the way, of self-promotion. Maybe you go even further than I do because I don't dress up in pink and kind of, wave my tummy around.
It's a cheap shot, but it works.
Yeah, but it's the same thing. So, you and I are very similar. I think we've both got our critics, big time. We've both got our doubters, but everyone bloody knows us, right? So, and that whether that's been done through PR per se, as in press releases, or through social media, or standing up at events, or buying everyone a drink at the bar at EA Martin or whatever, it's all PR. And what do you then think of, you think of Russell Quirk, Simon Whale, Peter Knight, Michael Bruce, Kenny Bruce, and so on and so on. Doesn't really matter what you think about them and whether everyone's a fan or everyone's a critic. Everyone bloody knows you. So therefore, you're front of mind, you're front of center. And that's kind of what we try and do at Proper PR, is to do that to people's brands so that they become renowned and talked about and are seen as experts and so on. But also the founders, because the founders, particularly in our world of startups in prop tech, the founders often are the brand, really. You look at people like Raj at FixFlow, he was, I think, even better known than his brand, and that's certainly true of the Bruces, I think. So
and it's an industry that lends itself to that as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is. Look, I don't think there's enough people that step up. There's not enough people that comment, and look, I'm the pantomime villain, aren't I, in terms of what I say. I write stuff and get shot down in flames, and I, water off a duck's back, mate.
Come on, you love it. You love it.
No, I do. I don't. Look, if I write something about purple bricks and I get a load of people pile in and 50 negative comments, well, I know it's because 10,000 people have read that piece, and that in itself does the job.
that's your neutralizing bar back to anyone, isn't it? It's always, I've seen that. Well, it was the most read story of that week. But I think just going back to the serious side of it as well is the reason why it is so important is, you know, there are all those stats about how many different times you're being hit by different messages in this day and age. And attention is the currency by which we work on. So anything you can do that at least you've still got to then deliver the relevant message on top of that, but you've got an artificial, step up, haven't you? And the other thing is as well is, if all of these things that this attention gives you is connections, as we know in everything, the reason why networking works is every connection brings an opportunity to do more with it, can't you? You can't develop a business relationship with someone you don't know.
Yeah.
And that's the vital part of it, isn't it?
I think in estate agency and property per se, you know, those relationships and the referrals and the recommendations that come from those relationships, I think is massively underestimated. You know, whether it's, you know, selling a product or service to estate agents and then getting the estate agents to tell their estate agency mates about it, or in particular, I think in estate agency now from a B2B to C perspective, you know, the lost opportunities now where you list someone's house and you sell it and everything kind of goes okay. And then the agent doesn't then ask for a referral or a recommendation afterwards. You know, there's a lot of businesses now, particularly the new hybrids, they don't really spend any money on marketing. So Keller Williams, EXP, you know, Fine and Country, the hybrid guys now, they're not spending money as we would recognize it, like Purple Bricks, eMove, Strike, you know, House Network used to.
Yeah.
They're relying on those relationships and then a free recommendation or a free referral, which then ends up being a £4,000, £5,000, £6,000 fee. So that is all the same thing. It's the opposite, actually. And look, here's the irony. It's the opposite of what I was doing at eMove, which was all about digital commoditization, anonymity almost. Mm-hmm. You know, and it's, look, the human connection, particularly now we're coming out of this pandemic, and we can argue about whether we are or not all day long, probably. It's that normality is really important to business on every level, I think.
Yeah, so and you mentioned there, obviously, PR is not for everybody because some people don't see the value of it. And one of the difficult, I mean, I've dealt with PR companies in over many years, and even myself, who you know, who's a big fan, obviously, of doing this. You know, it can be frustrating, can't you, when you're trying to, you know, when you're trying to justify the ROI on this. I mean, when you get a big, you know, when you get a big inclusion in something and you can see the leads come back, but it takes time to work it and let it work its way through, doesn't it, to allow that consistency and everything else.
It definitely takes time. And look, we get people coming to us saying, oh, can you just do my launch? Or can we just work with you for 3 months? And it's just, well, there's no point, you know. It's like in estate agency terms, listing your house with an agent and giving them a 10-day sole agency. Well, it's never going to work, is it? So some PR is not trackable, it's not measurable, because it's kind of surreptitious. Yeah. PR, as we touched on, needs to work hand in hand with other things, whether it's digital ads, whether it's Facebook ads, whether it's Google, you know, whatever, outdoor advertising, etc. So it needs to be holistic.
So on that, Russell, though, do you help talk to them about that side of things as well? Or
we do very, very much, because look, we track certain things. So we track how many pieces of coverage a client's had, what the eyeballs were worth. So obviously getting someone a quarter of a page in the Daily Mail is, no disrespect to Property Week, but worth a little bit more than getting a quarter of a page in Property Week. So we measure those metrics, but also a thing called AVE, which is the equivalent advertising value. So in other words, that quarter of a page in the Daily Mail is worth 15 grand. So we say, oh, look, this week you've had £43,000 worth of coverage equivalent, and that's where we get the ROI from, which, and our ROI based on every pound spent on us as a subscription, if you like, as a retainer, the average client in total over a 12-month period will get 27 times that back in value. Mm-hmm. But without kind of geeking out on it too much, you know, most of our clients do track what the effect of PR is in terms of people searching for their brand online, people searching for generic terms like, let's say, I don't know, you know, best rental platform, best management company, best estate agent, you know, nearest letting agent, whatever. They track that in terms of the increase in people searching for them and finding them, based on the fact that their kind of prowess, their traction increases, the more PR they get. So yeah, we do, but obviously it's up to the client to try and gauge it. We do have funny instances sometimes where occasionally someone will say, oh, I haven't had much from the PR over the last 3 or 4 weeks. And you say, well, that's a bit odd. So how are you tracking it? And they say, well, every single one of our salespeople says, where did you hear of us? And they're just saying, well, it's all just coming from the website. And of course you look at them and say, well, hang on, that's the traffic that we're partly responsible for driving, right? If it wasn't for the fact that you were in the Telegraph last week and the Times the week before, with people then seeing you and searching for you online, not least the SEO benefits, we are getting too technical here, but the SEO benefits in terms of what Google see you as when you've got repeated coverage online all the time, all of those benefits mean that although PR can definitely be more flaky to gauge and measure than Google AdWords, for instance, it's definitely measurable and there's definitely an ROI on it, assuming that the PR agency is doing what they're supposed to be doing. And of course, the coverage has to be relevant. It has to be stuff. There's no point it being purely about lettings if you don't do lettings. It has to be.
And you do see that sometimes, don't you, where the PR agency they'll get inclusion, but it's not a relevant bit, so it's like, well, I know you're still getting your name out there, but it's still got to be on topic, hasn't it?
Yeah, no, it has. And the art of the agency is to have the ideas that relate to that particular client. So we have 20 odd clients, various estate agents, letting agents, prop tech platforms, property management companies, whatever.
Yeah.
But they all have their nuances. They all have their uniqueness. So there's always an angle that can be used to promote that particular business because of what it does well or what it does differently. A really good example is this, the real surge in hybrid agents, and by hybrid I mean not online, not high street branch, but the likes of Keller, EXP, and a whole bunch of others now. You've got the big and the small, you've got the Fine & Countries, the Hortons, the Agent and Homes, the guys like David Lee, for instance, that have got 9 associates, but 9 associates that have been with them ages and are really productive and so on. There's an angle for every one of those to kind of show them in a kind of specific beneficial way, and that's what a good PR agency would do. And without blowing my trumpet too much, because obviously I'd never do that. It's not easy for an agency that isn't in the sector to do that. So, for instance, if I had a car company come to me and say, "Can you PR our model range?" Yeah, I could probably do that. I like cars, but it's not my specialism. And trying to get a PR agency that does property rather than a PR agency like ours, where we are actually property people, it makes a huge difference to the creative ideas, the output, the relationships that we have with particular journalists and so on and so forth. So, and honestly, since the demise of, I don't know if you remember him, actually, John Wrigglesworth. Do you remember John? So John used to be, he used to have the property PR agency, which he then sold to Instinctive. We're now them. We're now him. We are John Wrigglesworth. I'm John Wrigglesworth, although he's substantially older than me and has this weird penchant for drinking red wine with ice in it. Have you seen that? But anyway, no, great guy, brilliant at what he did. Kind of decided to step aside.
They always did good bashes. I do remember. Obviously, famously turning up to the opening of a letter, but they did.
But he was good because he was a property analyst, right? I'm good, I think, because I've been in the property industry 25 years. James, my business partner and co-founder, has been writing PR stories and press releases in the property sector for 7 years, and I think that's the difference. There's PR agencies that generalize, there's PR agencies that are specific to different sectors. We're the only one that's run and has at its helm on a day-to-day basis genuine property people.
So how do you get under the skin, Russell, of the businesses that your clients that you're going to work with? What's the starting process for learning what's different about them?
I'm not sure we're allowed to use this term anymore, but it's a brainstorm. I think that's big. Hasn't that been cancelled?
You're fine. As long as you don't say you're going to reach out to somebody, that's when I have to kick you off the show.
But then I might circle back.
Okay.
No, so we do a brainstorm, which is 3 hours, hopefully at the client's office with them and their team. We spend a good hour just talking to them about them, brand, proposition, USPs, competition, goals, boundaries. We really get under the skin, so we really understand the business. We've taken on recently, as an example, a couple of businesses that are in property funding, so they're funding platforms. And of course that could be very, very specific, whether it's buying single buy-to-let properties or portfolios, or whether it's kind of bridging, or it's senior debt or otherwise. It all gets quite complex. Well, we need to understand that, and so we spend a lot of time trying to get to know the client and their approach, and then we sit down and literally brainstorm a whole bunch of ideas and say, look, here's 15 ideas that we're thinking about that we think would stand you in good stead as experts and thought leaders, that journalists also will think are interesting enough to publish, and we kind of throw them around and kind of throw a few out, add a few more in, tweak a few. That then provides the framework and the ideas, and each idea, and most PR agencies think we're nuts doing this, by the way, each idea is a weekly press release. So every client gets a press release every single week.
I mean, that's very unusual. I mean, we're here to find out what's different about you guys. That's pretty much unheard of, isn't it? As you said.
Yeah, and it's it's relentless. So we've got let's say 20 clients, that's 20 press releases going out. But then we also do a thing called newsjacking, which is probably my favorite thing. Can I just explain what that is? Because it's just is
this the one where there's a story out there and then you ride on the back of that story and put your own addition to it?
Yeah, instantly. So this morning, for instance, the Rightmove index was published.
Yeah.
Although here's a little secret, we get it 2 days early, but under embargo. So we can't talk about it, we can't publish it. But it means we can write about it literally, so that a minute
ready to go like that as soon as the press. Yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah. So today you would have seen in I think Property Industry Eye, they were talking about the Rightmove index, and it quotes 3 of our clients because James wrote that on Saturday. So it's got out there. Where it gets really interesting is where we don't get stuff in advance. So, for instance, Office of National Statistics, house prices, Halifax nationwide, government announcements, that kind of thing. So we have to have a big calendar of what's coming out each day of each week. And often it's kind of 7 a.m. stuff. So it's, way before you got up, for instance, way before you got up. And we sit there and we write the comment literally within 5 or 10 minutes of the news coming out that says house prices up, house prices down, flat, London's lagging behind the rest of the UK, whatever. And it's not just a skill, you have to be really fast. Yeah. And then we have a special list that our software distributes that comment out. So literally within 10 minutes, it will say Simon Weller Kerfuffle says, and you'll see it on Reuters, or you'll see it in the Daily Express.
Yeah,
you have to be very agile, very agile. And look, our clients love that, because that's where they also tend to get a lot of national coverage. So, again, the obvious, the Times, the Express, the Mail, and the FT, and so on.
And are they all still? I mean, I've heard lots of talk about, that the traditional news has been struggling to create essentially its own content these days. Are they, on the whole, more demanding for externally sourced content these days, or? Yeah.
Yeah, big time. I remember being in the newsroom of the Daily Telegraph with Anna White a while back. And she'd explained she had to write, I think, 5,000 words that day. And so when a good PR agency doesn't just kind of badger her to see what she's after, but actually sends her ideas packaged up like we do. Yeah. So we'll have an idea. Let's say, actually, here's one that you and I will have some fun with. Leave versus remain house price areas. Right. So which areas of the UK, depending on whether they voted leave or voted remain, which one's gone up in house price terms the most? And of course, it's Brexit. The Brexit side will always win, as you well know.
Because Remainers are still being punished for something we didn't control.
Well, yeah. Well, Remainers are all unemployed. So we'll do that as a package. So we'll have the idea. Alex, who's our head of research, who's the most intelligent bloke in the world, PhD grad, blah, blah, blah. He will sit there and crunch the data. We then craft that into a release with a comment with all the data, and we send it out to property journalists, who then will obviously reinterpret it. They'll ask a load of questions, they'll recraft it, etc. But it's giving them an idea and an inspiration so that they can write about it, rather than just piggybacking what they're doing or asking them what they're doing. So we're contributing to the content agenda with ideas based on our knowledge and the data that we find. And it's a very happy relationship, frankly.
Yeah, it sounds fascinating. You've essentially weaponized the PR and the information, the way that Dataloft do around just raw property stats and everything else there. You've really taken that on board, haven't you, in terms of what's in the attention, what's got the attention of people already, and riding on top of that wave by adding your own particular contribution to it, which is
and look, it gets real fun, and you know, we'll do something. I mean, it depends on the client, because obviously some clients want to be kind of more broadsheet and some are happy to be a bit more tabloidy. You know, one of the most successful things that we've ever done is stuff where, you know, you compare Ian Beale's house in EastEnders to Ken Barlow's house, right?
I mean, you just know that that's going to be the most clicked on article of the
And it goes and makes the Mail, Mirror, Sun, Star, and it's just, you know, wow, you know, 4 million people saw that article, and it was Get Agent or whatever who we did it for. Colby Short says, yay, fantastic. So yeah, look, it's, you know, and some of it though is very serious data led. I remember we did a thing on MP second houses and how much each MP that was retiring in the previous election, in fact the previous election, had made on their taxpayer funded house. So we had to research every MP that was standing down, where they bought their house, and given the area, what they'd made on it in profit at the taxpayer's expense, and added it all up. And I think our graphic was a picture of the Houses of Parliament with the number above it, 1.8 billion. That took 2 weeks to research, you know, but it made the Daily Telegraph, you know. So we can do serious, we can do not so serious, you know, we can do, you know, basically any flavor. And almost, I think in fact, someone might want to test me on this. We can almost turn any story, any news cycle item into something related to property. I mean, we've definitely done it with Brexit a million times, and COVID, and so on. So it's
very night lies that, you know, that niche, that skill set, isn't it, where you know property so well to be able to bring together the major news story out there in a different area, and as you said, property it up, so to speak.
And I think, you know, for those watching this, the other thing to remember is that our industry, whether you're a property supplier or you're an agent in lettings or sales, or a mortgage broker or a conveyancer or whatever, you know, we are in one of the most competitive sectors in the country. You know, 17,000 estate agency branches. What is it now? 2,500, 3,000 conveyancers. God knows how many mortgage brokers and lenders, co-working spaces, and also property, of course, has multiple subsectors. So we talk about the property sector. Well, what's that? Resi, commercial, sales, lettings, legal. I mean, you know, there's literally hundreds of different kind of versions of that. So, you know, the PR thing, as we've just outlined, in terms of showing a client as an innovative expert, is really important in not just putting their head above the parapet, but in showing their expertise. Because frankly, if you don't do it as an agent, let's say, or a conveyancer, you know, you will find a competitor does it, and before you know it, you know, you were looking in the rearview mirror and there was no one there, and all of a sudden they've gone past you. You know, and there's lots and lots of examples of that. You know,
can I just ask you, just, you know, you're talking about sometimes it's a broadsheet kind of approach, sometimes it's tabloid. Do you have a particular preference, or or is there, and is one more effective than the other, or is it literally just horses for courses?
It does depend on the client, but mainly I suppose I get more excited by the broadsheet stuff because it tends to be a bit more valuable. It's a bit more grown up, isn't it? A bit more sensible. You know, the holy grail, I suppose, if we're talking about, you know, in our 3 years, because we're not such a new business anymore, probably we're 3 years old. You know, the stuff that we've had in the Telegraph has been good, but the FT is even better. You know, the FT is proper top drawer stuff because it's the FT. We had Mark von Grunher from Benham and Rees. He's been on the BBC a number of times, including, and this is the holy grail, the BBC Breakfast Sofa in Salford. You know, that's probably the number one, the pinnacle that PR agencies kind of reach for, because the BBC is obviously somehow still the most trusted news source in the world. Just about.
Probably not for long, the way it's going.
Not for long, no. Well, hopefully it'll get broken up. But anyway, but for now, it's incredible.
You leave my auntie alone, you.
It's very, very well trusted, but also the future. I think they get whatever it is. I mean, several 100,000 viewers for BBC Breakfast in the morning, and then, you know, you've got Sky and, you know, the likes of the Huffington Post and Bloomberg. Bloomberg, if you're someone that is looking for investment and you end up on Bloomberg, well, you will be sitting there on a telly to hundreds of thousands of potential private equity guys, venture capitalists, and high net worth individuals across the planet. Right? It's just it's pretty big stuff.
I mean, there's a couple of things. How do you set the expectation levels of, for the idea of like a high street agent or whatever that is now, they can't all be expecting clearly to get, be sat on the couch or getting a BBC. So where do you kind of, get them to think what they can achieve by working with you? How does that work?
Genuinely asking where they want to be. I mean, we have clients that aren't bothered by national newspaper coverage. Yeah. I mean, which might sound surprising. We always like to layer in nationals because it just, whatever you're selling to whomever, however small and local the market is, getting in the Express every now and again, obviously, it's a big tick. So it really depends what they want. So they set the expectations. And there's a lot of our clients just want trade. They want to be in Property Week, Estate Agent Today, Property Industry Eye, a negotiator, Mansion Global, Estates Gazette, etc. So we focus the ideas on that. So we try to manage expectations based on what the client wants, rather than it being, and it definitely isn't a kind of one size fits all. I mean, it really isn't, particularly across that B2B, B2C that we keep talking about. They're very, very different audiences. But typically, we look at the numbers, we look at the data. Now we're a few years old, we can see actually what we achieve. And typically our average client will get about 50 pieces of coverage a month. So it's, and that's a real mix. So there might be some nationals, some regionals, some trade.
Break that down. They get about 50
pieces of coverage each month per client. Yeah. And I mean, some, particularly those that have been with us longest. We've got clients that have been with us almost since the beginning. Those guys, because they're even more established and not just known by the public, but they're known by journalists. Journalists will ring us and say, can you get me a quote from Colby Short at Get Agent, please? Or from Mark Von Grun here at Benham and Reeves, because they know we work with them. Those guys often get over 100 pieces of coverage a month.
I mean, as I said, I've just made me realise I was with the wrong companies. But that sounds very
big volume. Sorry, it's big volume, and it's about quality and quantity. I know it sounds like a bit of a cliche, but it is. But a lot of that is achieved by this weird way that James and I and Alex, our brains work, where we can come up with the ideas, research them, and write stuff and get it out there. And it's just. Yeah, it lands. It just works.
Yeah, and I mean, I do remember. I mean, 2 of our biggest contracts came from PR, PR pieces there. So there's absolutely no doubt in my mind at all why it's so important. You mentioned earlier as well that you work with both agents and suppliers and prop tech there. What's the difference? As you said, B2B is very different to B2C there. How do you deal with the supplier side of the equation there in terms of promoting those businesses? And is that a much more challenging thing, given PropTech's rather sneered upon description by many property people?
Well, I think it's fairly straightforward, because most PropTech businesses are not using PR agencies, and of course, look, they can't all, but that kind of landscape that they're all aiming for, whether they're trying to hit estate agents, letting management agents, or whatever, it's a fairly kind of narrow field, I suppose. It's a fairly niche market. Yeah. Look, I think depending on what they want that audience to be, we have the ideas that will get them seen in those publications on a regular basis. But no, I don't want this to sound like it's kind of almost gratuitous. I mean, it's based on good research, good data, interesting ideas. Dare I venture, I don't want to get kind of shot down in flames by them here, because they're all great people, but there are certain property trades that some days 20, 30, 40% of the content has been inspired, let's say, by us. So we've had an idea, we've seeded it, we've written it up and so on. And if you're a service business, let's say you're selling virtual tours, for instance,
yeah,
and you want to get out to house builders, housing associations, estate and letting agents, well, then you want to be seen in the right trade publications, and written about in a complementary way. The other thing I should probably say, Simon, is we haven't talked about controversy. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but every now and again I can be labelled as somewhat controversial.
I think I did describe it in the opening thing there, but we haven't touched on it. Yes, absolutely.
Well, no, but the point I was going to make was there's this kind of anomaly where my personal brand, which I know sounds a bit, whatever, is kind of about me having opinions and saying things as I think, really. So being very direct. Yeah. But actually, the PR that we
shooting from the hip is how some people
shoot from the lip. Yeah. So, but the way that we do PR for clients. Some clients might think, oh yeah, but I don't want to be controversial. I don't want to be slagging off Foxtons and Purple Bricks and the RICS every 5 minutes. That's not what we do. That's what I do, mainly because I think it's really funny. I'm just amusing myself, frankly, and because I think the thought leadership piece needs to be raised as an important thing. But for clients, it's much more straight back. It's much more about innovation or differentiation or money they've raised or them just being experts on the housing market, the lettings market, or whatever it might be. So it would be easy to think that because I am what I am and who I am, that therefore that's reflected in us.
I do get that insight. I think that's a really important point to put out. And dare I say it, the flip, I'd hate to think that I was the flip side of the mirror to you, but there are obviously, we have to make the point that there are very serious people that do the work at Kerfuffle, outside of myself. And of course, if you're representing a business, aren't you? It doesn't have to be the whole Marmite image there. You've got a team, but you understand exactly what's needed to promote people in the right way. So
So James, my business partner, I think he spends half his life with his head in his hands over me. But it kind of also, bless him, you'll see him at EA Masters.
We'll have him on next. That'll be the follow-up.
You're right, you should, because I wouldn't say he's not the straight guy. I mean, he's as big a bundle of fun as I can ever be. But he takes it very seriously when it comes to writing a 2-page press release, distributing it, monitoring it, and making sure we're doing what the client wants to get them coverage, recognition, and to promote them as thought leaders. So it's that's the downside, I suppose. And I guess, as you've touched on, you had the same, I suppose, because it's not all dressing up and running around and having fun. Of course, there's a serious side to all this, but at the same time, we ourselves have to get noticed.
Here's the thing: you can't sit on the fence anymore, can you? Or if you can, that's a really boring, overpopulated place to be, isn't it? Blandness is just in this day and age. You don't have to, unless we're going for 100%, market saturation here. We need to understand our viable audience and to be engaged with them in the way that they think. And I think that's the most important one there. Get to that stage, then worry about world domination after that.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I don't, I think whether it's, you take as an example the likes of Piers Morgan, who of course has just been hired by my favorite radio and TV station, Talk Radio and Talk Radio TV. I definitely don't always agree with him, and I definitely think he goes over the top. Although, believe it or not, I have been described as the Piers Morgan of property, which I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's a compliment. But anyway, but love him or hate him, he draws an audience. When ITV sacked him, their audience on GMB dropped by about 70%. Yeah. So, and
that tells you, if you're looking at just anything, any levels there, you can do what you like, you can rant about it there, but you can't ignore the numbers, can you?
No, but then you also look at some, and I won't mention any names, but let's say an opinion piece or something written for Property Industry Eye by some people will get 200 or 300 reads a day. By other people might get 10 to 20,000. There's a difference. And the difference in style, of course, is that, there's people like me that write like Jeremy Clarkson or Piers Morgan, I suppose. And there's other people that write a very, informative, but quite vanilla and standard account without a punchy headline. Guess which one gets written, read about the most? It's just a fact.
It depends what you want to go for, isn't it? But you're not going to ignore it. There was two things I just wanted to catch up on as well. When you were talking about that kind of onboarding process, I think you mentioned before one of the things that you do is sit down with the team as well. I'm guessing that's really, really important, isn't it? Because the way that often the business principal will see, their own businesses being far too close to it can be and will be very different compared to what the staff have, dare I say, a more realistic from the coalface kind of view. Is that correct? Or
yeah, no, it's funny you say that. We've had a few meetings in the past where you say, okay, could you just describe what the business does, but in your words. And the boss would have a completely different view to the staff, and the staff are kind of looking at each other going, oh, really? Or the boss is looking at them and thinking, hang on, did you not know that that's kind of how we articulate ourselves?
It's so common, isn't it? That it's such a common.
Yeah, it is. But look, the saying about UK prop tech is that there's a whole bunch of solutions out there trying to find a problem. Right? We've all heard that, and it's because it's kind of true. And I think if you can't define as a CEO or a founder or as a marketing team or a comms team what you do and why you do it and the problem you solve in less than 30 seconds, well, then you're never going to explain that to a potential customer.
Especially if you happen to come from a slightly techie ivory tower as well, coupled with that, isn't it?
But I think that there's also, apart from that, there's always, I noticed with some startups, we're probably getting a bit off track here, but some startups that as they get bigger, they raise 5 million quid and they become a growth business, they bring in a new chief marketing officer and 17 marketing people underneath them. All of a sudden, it all starts to get more complicated and more sophisticated. And I did a webinar for a business called Halo recently where they said, what are your big takeaways when it comes to marketing advice, for what it's worth from me? And I said, look, right, before you start spending fortunes on whether it's PR, Google AdWords or Facebook, make sure that your site, your website where you're actually pushing people to go and look, actually is clear. Can someone look at your site and see what you do straight away rather than it being a load of kind of, dare I say, bullshit bingo speak, where you're
lifestyle images. Guy holding an iPad normally.
Well, a game changer in innovative property approach to empower the consumer to do blah blah blah. What the hell is that? What does that do? Why don't you just say we're a fixed fee estate agent? Or why don't you just say we're a lettings and management company that puts the power of, whatever transparency in the consumer's hands, whatever it might be, make it really, really, really clear.
This is a wider point here, isn't it? But that's a real danger, isn't it? Where people just try to be too clever and overcomplicate matters.
Yeah. And also in PR, here's a message to all our future clients. PR, this is a bold statement, PR is not advertising. Okay. So we often will write a press release, and look, James is really good at this, right? He understands journalists. He knows what to write so that it pushes the point, pushes the brand, gets across what that client does. But sometimes it's quite surreptitious because we're trying to get something across in the comment or the boilerplate, and we're trying not to be too obvious about it. If the journalist or indeed the sub-editor says, look, there's just blatant advertising, but that's not what editorial is, right? Adverts are adverts, editorial is editorial. We're promoting someone using editorial. So we occasionally have a client that will say, oh, no, can you push in that we're now open from 9 a.m. on a Saturday? And you go, no one cares. No one cares. We can do a piece about how much business is wasted outside estate agency hours. That's the sort of thing we do.
That's the
angle.
And that's the important thing, isn't it? Getting the same result out of it, but just thinking a bit more creatively about how to do that.
Exactly, mate.
Russell, who does PR well, apart from your own clients? You're not allowed to mention that. Who does PR well? And it can be both on the estate agency side or on the prop tech side of things at the moment. Who do you look at and think, okay, they've got that pretty well covered?
Look, I'd have to include you, and I'm not saying it just to blow smoke because we're on a no. But look, you're good at it, but without doing PR, yours is very kind of social media focused.
I'm an accident. I do it accidentally. Everything I've always done has been accidental.
Yeah, I think Chesterton's were doing a brilliant job. They were doing a very, very good job of quite subtly showing how they were performing last year. Of course, now famously they're up for sale, so we know what the game was there, don't we?
Of course, we do. And
push yourself.
Do you genuinely think, that does, you mentioned there in terms of Bloomberg and things like that, but that stuff definitely matters, doesn't it, when you're going through that process?
But then I'd have to say at the same time, there are businesses that are big and have loads of money available. Okay, they have a budget, which they have to stick within. And particularly, some of the portals, I'll mention one, On the Market, for instance, right? So Jason Tebb, has grabbed on the market by the scruff of the neck, and I think he's doing a good job as front man, showing that he cares about what the agent thinks.
Which really previously had been completely missing, hadn't it?
But he's got to get trust back, because Ian Springett, I think, just destroyed agents' trust in him and that business, in my opinion. But what on the market don't do, they don't really do any consumer PR. So they're not doing stuff that shows the agent and buyers and sellers, how clever they are, or what thought leadership there is, or how expert they are in the market. Where Rightmove, of course, I mean, look, today, as we're filming this, have done, yet another monthly Rightmove house price index, which has been covered by just about every national newspaper. So I'm often surprised. I'm surprised about two things, I suppose. The number of businesses in our sector that really don't take advantage of any kind of PR. And I'm really not saying that just because I want them all to come to me for PR. Believe me, look, we can't take, infinite clients. But then, really, really surprised by the portals and others, that they really don't take advantage of their size and indeed the data they've got, and push themselves out there to the consumer, and therefore indirectly to the industry, as knowledgeable, and as trusted and as credible. So I'm kind of surprised, I suppose, that there's some that really don't take advantage of what's staring them in the face.
Great opportunity there, isn't there, in terms of what's out there?
Yeah, and I think so. So, but I think, back to the point I think we kind of touched on earlier, I think that PR is misunderstood. It's seen as the likes of Richard Branson and Elon Musk. Believe me, I'd love clients like Richard Branson and Elon Musk. I wouldn't have to do anything, because they just do it for themselves. You start, smoking marijuana in the radio. Guess what? That's PR. Roller skating behind a, rocket ship or whatever Branson does. But at the beginning, if you want to build your business to be seen and to be known and to be trusted, and you as the founder, you have to start layering it earlier on. And look, it will take months and months and months, but it does build, and you will ultimately get there. But of course, you've got to invest in it, like you would have to invest in any other marketing channel.
When we asked you about, some of the things we might be able to talk about here as well, one of the things that you came back with, you were talking about PR helps Google love you. Is that literally just the bounce effect you get from relevant being linked to those stories?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an SEO expert, so SEO as in search engine optimization, but the way Google was set up back in the 90s was that they wanted basically to deliver relevant results to searchers. So the way that they gauge what's relevant is by knowing which other big websites with high, what they call domain authorities, which websites are talking about other websites. So let's say you're an estate agent and you've got a very low domain authority. When someone searches on Google, best estate agent locally, you're simply not going to show up on page one. So and if the old saying, if you're not on page one, you might as well be on page 10, right? And that's definitely true. So the more PR you get, the more, and it doesn't even have to be the BBC and ITV and Bloomberg and the Daily Express talking about you, but the more links and even mentions that you get that then appear on Google then know that your site is more credible and more relevant. So all of a sudden you go from page 3 to page 2 to page 1, not just for people searching for your brand, but people actually searching for generic terms like best local estate agent or cheapest letting agent, wherever it might be. So yes, there's a direct effect on search engine optimization and the performance of and ranking of your website by having PR. We have some clients that really only use us because of the benefit they get from using us and the volume we get because of the SEO effect. So
that's really Martin. I can get that. I understand that authority piece really, really well. So I think that makes perfect sense. And in terms of that value you give back to your clients, I'm sure I didn't get this wrong. The current ROI you're delivering for your clients, you're measuring. Did you say it was 27 times ROI?
Yeah. So over 12 months, we looked at this beginning of this year. So if you looked at the average equivalent ad value, each client over that period, it was 27 times what they paid us. So the ROI was 27x. Using that particular measure, you can use all sorts of other measures. I'd argue that back to the SEO point, if your domain authority out of 100 is 15, so it's not that good, and we double it, so you end up on page 1, not page 3, if I said to you at the beginning, well, if we do that, pay us 25 grand, for instance, not that we are 25 grand, but that would be seen as a reasonable cost. We do that stuff for nothing. That's just
it comes as a halo effect.
It's incidental. So look, that's basically, in a nutshell, that's how we work. And I have to say, I mean, and look, not just saying it for effect. I think now we're 3 years old and people can see that I'm in particular not playing at it, because, the propaganda PR thing, now proper PR thing, came out of the ashes of eMove. Within a month of that business folding, I started this business with James Lockett. I think there were a number of people that probably thought, oh yeah, well, that would just be a temporary side gig while he decides, on world domination through.
This is your passion though, isn't it? I mean, it's.
Mate, it really is. I love the clients. I mean, James and I, it's 7:30 in the morning. He's sending me and our clients messages saying, in the Times, in the Sun, in the Mirror, we've got this, we've got that. We have a real enthusiasm for that and a real buzz.
I don't know. I feel comfortable that you're dominating and manipulating the news in quite such a powerful way.
Do you know what? I can't believe that I'm only the 6th most influential person in the property industry. And you're number bloody, what are you, 3?
3. Outrageous. And I'm not including the Bruces at number 2. There's 2 of them, so I get second place behind 90.
Yeah, so I'm not having that. That's got to change next year.
Can I just finish? And I think obviously it's such a powerful thing that you're talking about here. In terms of, first of all, just people getting involved with you in terms of the commercials, I'm guessing they need to have a conversation with you, and then you'll come up with a proposal for them on the back of that. But just to put people's mind at rest here, as he said, you're not in this uber expensive, or you're not the cheapest one there. But this is, if you're serious about it and you're willing to invest. I mean, there's not many people who, if they can buy into those ROI figures, can tangibly ignore that sensibly, really.
Yeah, and it's that we can talk about, it's an investment, not a cost, all day long. But the PR is probably split into 3 different categories when it comes to cost. Yeah. There's the really expensive guys in the West End that are between 8 and 10 grand a month. We're not that. And then there's the freelancers that do a great job at lower volume, kind of specialist trade stuff here and there that might be $1 grand or 2 a month. We sit between those. In fact,
you're in the Goldilocks zone, as I always talk about.
Yeah, we sit nearer the latter than the former.
If you're directly in the middle, so you're like, what you're saying is then, Ross, it sounds to me, you're the Lib Dems, the in-betweeners of PR. Is that what you're saying?
No, we're the centrists, and of course, as you well know from election history, the centre ground always wins elections, and that's where we are.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
But not the Lib Dems. They haven't won an election since the days of Jeremy Thorpe before he went to prison about 60 years ago, mate.
I knew we'd finish on this. Okay, just on one thing while we're talking about politicians and whatnot. The one thing I did want to talk about as well, you made the point, is you said often a PR agency's value is what doesn't get printed, not just what it does. Just talk us through that.
Without using specifics, of course.
Yes, yeah, exactly, yeah.
There are, and not so much with trade journalists, but there are often instances where you can have so I'm choosing my words very carefully here. You can have very grown up.
I'm enjoying you tiptoeing your way through this.
Yeah, it doesn't happen very often, does it? Normally just shout my mouth off. No, there are instances where careful, grown up, common sense conversations can be had with journalists that avert a PR disaster for a client.
So they're going to run with a story. You get wind of it. You're able to talk to them and leverage your relationships. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I'll give you an example without mentioning names. So some months ago, we had a client say, "I've had the BBC on the phone. They want to talk to us." We said, "Oh, fantastic. Yeah. Who is it?" And we looked and we could see it was a watchdog journalist, right? Watchdog is not a good look.
No, it's not. Yeah, we're all rogue traders.
Yeah. So let's just say we got involved, and by being very, very honest and legitimate, we made sure that the journalist understood that our client was not the bad guy in the story. And they didn't run it.
It was pivoting it just enough.
Yeah, they didn't run it, but unfortunately, I think 2 other people got thrown under the bus, but they weren't our clients.
Yes, you can't. Not all heroes wear capes, can they? You can't.
I know. But that has happened, mate. That's happened 2 or 3 times, and it's you have certain PR agencies, by the way, that only do what they call crisis PR, right? I'm not sure if I want to be one of those. They'll charge you, I don't know, they'll charge a big company that's got some big scandal, financial or, B2, whatever it might be. It's,
BP have done another oil field or something like that.
Yeah, it's like 150 grand to try and make it go away kind of thing. And that's not our world. But if we have a client and he rings up, and this has happened, as I say, 3 or 4 times now, says, I think I might be in a little bit of trouble because we will do our very, very best, particularly if we know the journalist very well. There might be a bit of kind of, don't look over here, look over here kind of thing,
Okay, cool. Well, look, I think that's absolutely fascinating and interesting. And as I said, I knew we wouldn't have I knew this wasn't going to be one of those half-hour talks. But just to be able to reach out to you again, they can find you where?
Yeah, so Twitter, where they'll often see you and I arguing, or LinkedIn, of course, where I'm pretty active, or you can just email me, russell@properpr.co.uk, or my business partner is james@properpr.co.uk if you decide you don't like me very much, which is fine.
Perfect. Or, of course, go to the wonderful pink site, kerfuffle.com, look for Proper PR, go and see on there, and there's an interested button, and, of course, we'll forward on any inquiries. But Russell, really enjoyed that. I would love to have a chat with your colleague over the coming months as well. I think that would be really, really interesting. And I encourage anybody to have a chat with you, because I do know a little bit about this area, and the things we've been talking about stand out from the crowd, which, just to summarize again, what it's all about, really, isn't it?
That is exactly what it's about. Putting your head and shoulders above your competitors. Simple as that.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Russell. Have a great day.
Pleasure, mate. Thanks for having me, Simon. Seriously, thank you.
Cheers.